Questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Respected independent economist Chris Richardson has said the RBA is sending up a distress signal to the government, warning it can't do the job of reducing inflation on its own. Under Labor, inflation is at a 33-year high. Interest rates have gone up 8 times in 8 meetings of the Reserve Bank. Every decision Labor has made has increased inflation and pushed interest rates higher than they need to be. Prime Minister, is this why interest rates are always higher under Labor?
The Treasurer will cease interjection or will be warned. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Last Friday, I was listening to RN, and the New South Wales Treasurer said this: the Treasury in New South Wales have forecast inflation has peaked this year. There are significant headwinds being caused by the war in Ukraine, which is driving up the price of coal and gas, and that is feeding through to electricity prices. This is a global issue, and all reserve banks are fighting inflation. Indeed, the Reserve Bank is fighting inflation, and they say that our action is actually assisting in doing that. That's why we returned 99% of the revenue gains were returned to the bottom line, making a positive difference.
Order. The member for Hume and the Treasurer will cease interjecting.
Those opposite seem to be shocked by the fact that during a recession that occurred under their watch, what central banks will do, not just in Australia but around the world, is to lower interest rates in order to stimulate demand in the economy. That's what occurs under their watch. But they seem oblivious to any of that. They seem oblivious to the fact that interest rates were higher.
Manager of Opposition Business.
When John Howard was in government and when the person who asked the question actually occupied a position as Assistant Treasurer. Now, I don't blame him personally for the fact that interest rates were higher when he was Assistant Treasurer than when they are now, but that is a fact, and perhaps it should be a cause for some self-reflection from the Leader of the Opposition.
Order. There's far too much noise in the chamber. Give the call to the member for Lalor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my questions to the Treasurer. How will the Albanese Labor government's plans for more affordable housing help address some of the broader challenges in our economy?
Give the call to the member to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Lalor. The best thing to come out of the 2013 election. Appreciate the question. Mr Speaker.
Order. The Treasurer. Order. Members on my left. The member for Riverina. The House will come to order immediately, and the Treasurer will not be distracted and get back to the question.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we were elected to take on some of the big challenges facing our economy and facing our country. Inflation is the #1 economic challenge in 2023. It was in 2022, and that's why addressing inflation is the government's main focus. And through our 3-point plan to provide responsible cost of living relief by repairing our supply chains and showing appropriate spending restraint in a responsible budget, that is the best way to go about this hard task. Now, as the Reserve Bank said on Friday and the Prime Minister said a moment ago, we are taking some of the pressure off inflation through our 3-point plan to address the challenges in our economy. And the Reserve Bank made it clear that somewhere between a half and two-thirds, or half and three-quarters of the inflation in our economy comes from the supply side. And a lot of that is global, but a lot of it as well is the consequence of a wasted decade, where those opposite left neglected for too long too many of our economic challenges. and Australians are now paying a very hefty price for their failures to manage the economy well over the course of the last decade. We see that in the energy market with the lack of investment in cleaner and cheaper, more reliable energy. We see that in the labour market with the lack of investment in skills and training. And we see it as well in the housing market. Not enough done over a decade to boost housing supply in our economy. They racked up $1 trillion in debt, Mr Speaker, and still did almost nothing about housing supply in our economy.
Order. There's far too much noise in the chamber. The member for Moreton is warned. When someone rises to a point of order, the House must come to order immediately. We'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, the question went to the challenges affecting Australia. It wasn't an invitation for the Treasurer to run through his normal fictitious list of excuses.
I'm going to ask the Treasurer to return to the question.
No worries, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, just like we've got a plan to fix the broken energy market and skills shortages, we've also got a plan to help address the housing, affordability and supply challenges in our economy. We said we would tackle these challenges, and we are, because we know it's part of the broader inflation challenge in our economy. Now, the Housing Australia Future Fund, which will build more social and affordable homes under the oversight of the Housing Minister, will be a really important thing for us to do as a country. And the new National Housing Accord, an agreement with state and territory governments and local government and with the building industry and the super sector, will also build a substantial amount of new homes. Now, it beggars belief, Mr. Speaker, that after being such a big part of the problem for the best part of a decade, those opposite are now voting against the solutions. We are trying to clean up the mess that they left, and once again they're standing in the way. We have an economic plan to deal with this inflation challenge and to build more affordable homes in our country. It's all about relief and repair, and it's also about restraint in the budget. They just have a political strategy to get in the way of us cleaning up the mess that they left us.
I'll hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Treasurer's description of one interest rate rise under the former government as a full-blown cost-of-living crisis. Since then, Labor have failed to deliver a plan to deal with rising inflation, and the cash rate has risen 8 times in 8 consecutive meetings of the RBA. If one rate rise was a crisis in May, how would the Prime Minister describe the 8 rate rises since? Why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Order. I'll hear from the Prime Minister. He has the call.
Well, nobody wants to see interest rates go up, but it's a reality.
The Leader of the Opposition
where there's inflation.
Will cease interjecting. Order.
I think Australians understand that. There's a lot of pressure, upward pressure on interest rates at the moment. Well, it was his quote, not mine. That's what the Leader of the Opposition had to say. That's what the Leader of the Opposition had to say.
The member for Barker.
In May 2022. That's what the Leader of the Opposition had to say then. And the fact that you interjected so loudly and rejected that comment so strongly while I was quoting the Leader of the Opposition says a lot about the turmoil that is in your ranks today.
Order. Order. Members on my right. Members on my right will cease interjecting. Otherwise, a general warning will be issued and people will not be staying for question time. When the House comes to order, hear from the member for Hawke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. What are the consequences for Australians looking for a place to call home if the Housing Australia Future Fund is not established?
Give the call to the Minister for Small Business, the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do want to thank the member for Hawke for his important question. He understands, like does most of the people on this side of the House, but unfortunately not everybody in the chamber, he understands that many Australians are facing challenges as they try to find a safe, affordable place to call home. We know that some Australians are making some very tough decisions, Mr Speaker.
The member for Deakin
because, of
is
course,
warned.
Australians...
The member for Deakin is warned.
Australians are paying the price for the little action from the former government over almost a decade when it comes to housing affordability and housing supply. But of course, our government, the Albanese Labor government, was elected with a plan to help tackle the housing challenges. We said we would establish a $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund, and we've introduced that legislation. This would be the single biggest investment by a federal government in more than a decade in social and affordable housing in this country. It will create a secure pipeline, Mr Speaker, of funding for social and affordable housing.
Order.
It would be there in perpetuity, with returns being invested each and every year in social and affordable housing in this country.
The member for Fairfax
Mr Speaker,
warned.
it's been called, I quote, a golden opportunity by the Urban Development Institute of Australia. And with the measure introduced today, this is when we introduced it last week, we are structurally equipped to act, said Power Housing Australia. This will provide certainty to the housing sector and particularly the community housing sector. And importantly, it will make a real difference to people's lives. And those opposite apparently also
The
know
minister will
this.
resume her seat. There is now a general warning. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition is warned. When I'm speaking, it is not definitely the time not to interject. I don't know how many times I have to say that. Ministers should be heard in silence. This is not a free-for-all. If people continue, they simply and disrespect the standing orders, they won't be here. Give a call to the Minister for Small Business, Housing and Homelessness.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I was saying, the member for Cowper over there wrote to me highlighting his concerns over, quote, housing affordability and availability. And the member for Lyne over there, who last year expressed to me concerns over the urgent need for housing for key workers. And of course, the member for Farrer just this morning said, and I quote, "I don't deny that there are housing pressures that Australians face." And they're all too happy to acknowledge the problem, Mr Speaker, but of course they don't want to support us when we are acting. They don't want to support us when it comes to delivering on our election commitment of a $10 billion fund. Indeed, the old coalition over there, they're saying no to building more homes for women and children fleeing family violence. They're saying no to older women at risk of homelessness. You're saying no to building homes for veterans who are at risk of homelessness. And you're saying no to building more homes for people in need right across the country. I think Australians today will be totally shocked to hear that those opposite are voting against these important investments in social and affordable housing for Australians that need it most.
I'll hear from the member for Curtin.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Last week we found out that the Minister for Communications, who is responsible for regulating online gambling, accepted $19,000 in donations as well as repeated hospitality from large gambling companies. Prime Minister, you promised to bring integrity back to politics. When the Minister makes decisions on gambling, how do we know if her decisions are based on what our communities need or what the gambling companies have paid for?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Curtin for her question and for her ongoing commitment to making sure that the political system that we all operate under is improved. And that's why my government is committed through our Minister for the Special Minister of State bring forward reforms to make sure that, along with our National Anti-Corruption Commission, a change to the way that donations can be made within the system, including real-time declarations, including lowering the threshold of donations as well in terms of declarations. I do note that the Minister for Communications has declared all donations in an appropriate way, and I know that the Minister answered a question on this last week. But I make this point about the Minister for Communications and how you know what a good job she is doing and why she has my absolute and total confidence is this. The Minister is committed to delivering a national self-exclusion register. That's called BetStop. It will allow individuals to exclude themselves from all licensed interactive wagering services in just a single step. The Minister is also implementing initiatives from the National Consumer Protection Framework, including the changed guidelines for messaging in advertisements. We're also progressing work around the classification of video games with gambling-like features, making a major difference there as well, with changes that currently aren't captured under the Interactive Gambling Act. In addition to that, we're working on a response to recommendations from the parliamentary inquiry on the use of credit cards in online gambling. The Minister for Communications is the person driving that work. That is obviously very important as well. We've also established an inquiry into online gambling, including the impacts of gambling advertising on children. So let me be very clear. The Minister for Communications' record when it comes to harm minimisation on gambling is exemplary. And that is why she has my total confidence going forward.
Give the call to the honourable member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How will the Housing Australia Future Fund help women and children experiencing family, domestic and sexual violence? What will delays to the fund mean for the implementation of the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, including the Albanese government's goal to end violence in one generation?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the member for Jagga Jagga for that question. Of course, ending violence in one generation against women and children is not going to be easy, but we are absolutely, as a government, committed. And that's why I was so pleased last week to see my colleague, the Minister for Housing and Homelessness, introduce the landmark legislation to deliver the single biggest investment in affordable and social housing in more than a decade. Of course, this was an election commitment, and we, by introducing this legislation, are delivering. But critically, of course, it will deliver 4,000 homes for women and children impacted by family and domestic violence or older women at risk of homelessness. Returns also from the fund will be used for the government's commitment to provide over $100 million for crisis and transitional housing options for women who are impacted. Of course, family and domestic violence is one of the main reasons women and children leave their homes in Australia, and it is the leading cause of homelessness for children. Of course, in October last year, the Albanese government, together with states and territories, launched the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, which recognises the critical role that housing does play in ending gender-based violence. Of course, in October, the government's already taken action through delivering our announcement to deliver up to 720 safe places for women and children. But these houses allocated from the Housing Australia Future Fund are critical to complementing that investment, making sure that more options are available to more women. So therefore, it's incredibly disappointing that we've now learnt that those opposite are going to stand in the way of this investment. Of course, unaffordable, inadequate and insecure housing results in more than 7,000 women each year returning to violent homes because they have no place to live. It is confounding that those opposite will stand in the way of this important investment. Housing for women and children escaping violence should be above politics. It should be able to be put aside so that we can actually get on with the job. We must all be pulling in the same direction if we are going to achieve this. And I ask the opposition in a sincere way to reconsider their position on this. Reconsider this so that we can get on with the job of building affordable and safe houses in this country.
The member for O'Connor. Order. The Treasurer is not helping. I'll give the call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In 2006, the Prime Minister said the government has failed to keep a lid on inflation in Australia's economy, and as a consequence, interest rates have kept going up and up. After 8 consecutive rate rises on this government's watch, will the Prime Minister take responsibility for rates going up and up? Why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
I give the call order. Members on my right. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
One this year.
Order.
Well, I'm asked by the Shadow Treasurer in 2023 about a quote from 2006. And they say they're backward-looking. And they say they can't keep up with the times. I don't know where they get that from, Mr. Speaker. I don't know where they get that from. But I'm sure that whoever faxed that quote to the Shadow Treasurer, I'll just accept that perhaps it's accurate, even though it wasn't detailed what was there. But we actually have a plan to take pressure off inflation. To therefore, that's the way you take pressure off interest rates. And we have a plan also so that monetary policy works with fiscal policy together in order to achieve an outcome. And that's why the Reserve Bank Governor last week was talking about the inflation as being at least half and perhaps even more, 2/3, because of supply chain restraints. And what are we doing about supply chain? As part of our three-period relief, repair, restraint,
has asked his question.
The relief is energy price relief that they voted against, cheaper medicines that they don't support, cheaper childcare that they don't support, fee-free TAFE that they don't support. The repair is about supply chains, and we have legislation for the National Reconstruction Fund so that we make more things here, and they're voting against that, as well as dealing with the skills crisis that we inherited. And the restraint was shown by us returning those revenue gains to the budget. That's our plan. Those opposite have no plans except saying no and getting quotes from 2006 faxed through to their offices. The truth is that what we need in 2023 is a forward-looking government, and that's what you have right here. A forward-looking government that's looking at the challenges that we inherited off the former government, the problems that they created. It's one thing to create problems, which you did. You left us with $1 trillion of debt, a massive skills shortage, no industry policy plans, manufacturing going backwards, but then you stand in the way of solutions as well. No wonder you won't ask the Treasurer a question.
Time has expired. Hear from the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs. What support is the Albanese Labor government providing to veterans who are suffering homelessness, and what are the obstacles to this support being provided?
Give the call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Minister for Defence Personnel.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Solomon for this important question. And of course, the member for Solomon, as a veteran himself, is very committed to the cause of supporting our veterans, and I enjoy working closely with him in supporting the veterans in his community as around the country. And that's all part of how the Albanese government is committed to delivering a better future for our veterans and families. And of course, just as Australians across the country are confronted by difficulty accessing housing and cost of living pressure, that is absolutely affecting our veteran community as well. And that's why, as part of the budget last year, we expanded the Defence Home Ownership Assistance Scheme with a $46.2 million investment to allow our serving personnel to get access to housing assistance sooner and remove the cap for those that have left service to be able to access this scheme to help them as well. Because we know we have an obligation to support our veterans. We have an obligation to those that have put on our uniform to serve Australia, put themselves in harm's way to make sure that they are looked after. And too many veterans across this country are experiencing homelessness. Yesterday, the Assistant Minister for Veterans Affairs launched a toolkit outlining factors contributing to veterans' homelessness, their service needs and the available referral pathways. There's also specific veterans' homelessness services that are sprouting up across the country. And so I say to veterans and families, if you do need support with your living situation or homelessness, please contact DVA on 1800 838 372 or Open Arms on 1800 011 046. But more does need to be done. And we're getting on with the job in places like Darwin and the member for Solomon's electorate with funding for the Scott Palmer Centre. But crucially, to be able to expand this service provision for our veterans is our $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund, which will support veterans, it will support our First Nations communities, it will support victims of family and domestic violence. As part of that $10 billion fund commitment is a $30 million commitment to support veterans experiencing homelessness, to support veterans that are at risk of homelessness, and not just with housing itself, but with the wraparound services that our veterans need to support them in getting into secure housing. But what do we see when we're putting forward a package designed to support our veterans that we took to the last election, that was widely supported by community housing, by veterans organisations? What we get is those opposite are opposing it. There's no support from those opposite for our veterans getting into secure housing. We have a situation where housing for veterans, for some reason, is opposed by those opposite. So I say for those that are sitting opposite, think very carefully about the message that you are sending to Australians' veteran community when you are opposing a package to support them when they're experiencing homelessness.
Give the call to the honourable member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister explain to the House why Energy Australia is telling its consumers this week that the increase in electricity bills is due in part to, quote, some increases in government green schemes and market changes, unquote? Prime Minister, isn't Energy Australia right? And is this why your government constantly refuses to ever mention your election promise to cut electricity bills by $275? Why do Australians always pay more under Labor?
Give the call to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks. I thank the member for her question. And the Reserve Bank of Australia have said this in their statement on monetary policy of this month. They said this: wholesale electricity and gas prices declined in response to the announcement of the temporary price caps on domestic gas and thermal coal in the Energy Price Relief Plan.
Order. There is far too much noise in the chamber. The Prime Minister will be heard in silence. If there is further interjections, people will leave the chamber immediately. The Prime Minister has the call.
So, futures markets now suggest that wholesale electricity and gas prices will be lower in 2023, that's now, and 2024 than previously expected. Over this year and next—
Order.
Not just them. Claire Savage told Senate estimates yesterday.
Order.
In December, the National Cabinet announced an agreement for significant interventions in the wholesale gas, coal and electricity markets. We've seen futures markets fall materially since that time, and we think that will mitigate. That's what they had to say. The New South Wales Premier, so maybe you can interject on him too. I'm a free market guy and also a practical guy. So the fact you say I'm a free market guy and I'm supporting it must say something. It's states and territories working with the Commonwealth Government. Everyone on National Cabinet is on a unity ticket. And Matt Keane, the New South Wales Treasurer, said this: we're not on the side of energy bosses. We're on the side of consumers and businesses.
Order.
That's what Matt Keane had to say. That's what Matt Keane had to say in drawing a distinction between the two sides of this chamber. I say to the member who asked the question, you would have more credibility if you voted for energy price relief and hadn't have opposed the $1.5 billion that we will provide.
Order. Give the call to the member Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. Why is it important to invest in manufacturing jobs, and are there any threats to this investment?
Yeah, good question.
Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thanks, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Corangamite. Her state is a mighty contributor to manufacturing in this country, and there are at least or over 260,000 men and women in Victoria who owe their livelihoods to manufacturing. So it's a big deal. The government is delivering on our commitment to establish the National Reconstruction Fund. We took it to an election. We said we want to do it. We're going to do it, and that's what we're working on. It's a key plank in our effort to reduce this country's dependence on broken supply chains and help in our fight against inflation and to help reduce interest rates. The government's chosen priority areas of the economy with a view to growing jobs, playing to our current and emerging industrial strengths and our strategic national priorities. Again, we said we'd deliver, and we are. Manufacturing is critical, absolutely critical to an economy's health, because few other capabilities generate so many well-paying jobs. And if you look at it, it's the 7th largest employer. It creates nearly 900,000 jobs, and those jobs contain within just over 90,000 manufacturing businesses. And it is important to note that in some places it makes a huge contribution in regional communities. But notably, in Queensland, half the jobs in manufacturing are in regional areas. Very important. Very important.
On my left.
So we want to be able to grow those capabilities, and we want the National Reconstruction Fund to build and have those jobs from research and design to production. We need coders, welders, designers, researchers, machinists, everyone in between. Everyone in between. And to make all this happen, we need expertise in key enabling capabilities. Now, the Liberals and Nationals, they say they're pro-manufacturing. They love wearing the high-vis, but really, it's the cosplay coalition. They love the dress-ups. They love the dress-ups. They love putting on the high-vis, never there to back them. Never, ever there to back them. You know, when manufacturers, I remember that moment when manufacturers who make up half of the domestic gas demand needed support, they chose multinational profits over manufacturers. That's the record. And when we are ready to invest in capabilities, some of which will be dependent upon as part of our strategic alliances, say, for example, quantum and critical technologies, they won't support the fund that will support the development of that technology, keep companies onshore and make sure we can contribute. They are never, ever there when they are needed. Love to pretend, love to put on the high-vis, not there to back manufacturing workers, and particularly in regional communities that depend on manufacturing, they will be scratching their heads working out why the Liberal and National parties won't be there.
Time has concluded. I give the call to the member for Ford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. A single mother with 6 children in Queensland has been hit with a $1,500 electricity bill, much of which is due to the mother's need to charge her NDIS-supported daughter's electric wheelchair. Given that a worker at the mother's electricity company privately told this struggling single mother that she will be paying her bill, and I quote, for the rest of her life, will the Prime Minister immediately apologise to this family for promising them a $275 annual cut to their power bill? Why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Order. Order. Members on my left. Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Ford for his question. I do note that he was absent, he had leave when the vote happened in this parliament, which was $1.5 billion of assistance for people just like the constituent that he raised. And that is why that is why the Queensland government, as well as the New South Wales government, as well as every state and territory government, as well as this national government, all signed up to energy price relief, $1.5 billion. But those opposite, of course, voted against that. They voted against price caps that are already having an impact on prices. The member for Hume, we know, hid the price rises before the election and then misled Australians about it, actually changed the rules so it wouldn't be declared. And of course, as well, we know we're more vulnerable to international price increases than we should be, because 4 gigawatts of capacity got taken out of the grid and only 1 gigawatt put in. We're more vulnerable because we had 22 energy policies announced, but not a single one delivered, and they left us with an energy grid that was built for the last century. Even Snowy Hydro, which is a positive initiative, they just forgot to plug it in at any time to the grid. Those opposite came up with all sorts of fantasies about a way forward, including, I well remember, in Queensland, the feasibility study that was happening for the Collinsville power plant. Collinsville. They gave the $4 million for the feasibility study, I wonder to who? To the proponent. To the proponent. Here's $4 million to see if your project stacks up.
Well done, Angus. Well done, Angus.
And they took that to an election. They told Queenslanders that it was going to make a difference.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The members on my right will cease interjecting so I can hear from the Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
It's on relevance, Mr Speaker. If the Prime Minister has no practical assistance to offer this single mother
resume
and her
your
family,
seat. No, it's borderline abuse of standing orders, Manager of Opposition Business. You won't be warned again if that happens. The Prime Minister is in order. The question was about electricity prices and energy. He is answering the question directly. Give him the call.
And price relief, and we had $1.5 billion of price relief that they voted against. They voted against because they had the Collinsville fantasy that they took to an election. They kept talking about throughout the entire last term, knowing that it was never going to happen. Knowing that it was never going to happen, a bit like their glow-in-the-dark nuclear fantasy they're on about now.
Give the call to the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting regional manufacturing, and what risks are there to this approach?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you. Can I thank very much the member for Gilmore for her question. She lives in regional Australia just like me, and she knows what a great place it is to live and how important it is to actually stand up for regional manufacturing jobs. This government is delivering on our priorities, and we know how important the $15 billion regional and the National Reconstruction Fund is to our regions, because it will support regional manufacturing, and it will transform Australia's industry and create secure, well-paid jobs in regional manufacturing across all of our communities. We know that it will drive the transformation of Australian industry, and it revives our ability to make world-class products here, particularly in our regional communities. We expect that the investments in priority areas such as resources, in agriculture, not much ag in our cities, I'd have to say, defence and renewables, will help and will have a strong regional impact. Growth in these sectors, we know, will help regional areas diversify our economies, but they will also help transform our workforces and provide opportunities for young people in our regions into the future. It will drive economic development in our regions, boost our sovereign capability, and it diversifies the nation's economy and helps secure jobs in our regions. And I'll tell you what other people are saying about this fund. If you go to Townsville Enterprise has endorsed the fund's designs, and they have said it will provide an opportunity for those early-stage projects in emerging industries to gain access to funding and will encourage private investment in the region. Latrobe City Council provides their support for the fund, and it wants it to invest in projects that leverage the strength of the regions to provide a secure, long-term, meaningful jobs. This fund will also support our rail manufacturing plan.
The Minister will pause. The member for Herbert is continuing interjecting. You'll leave the chamber under 94A. The Minister in continuation.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker. Our rail manufacturing plan, a plan to build more trains here, more jobs in our regions like Maryborough and in Ballarat in my own hometown. We know that the fund will help transform that manufacturing to build more rail jobs. 4,000 jobs are already in rail, and we've seen good Labor state governments invest in it, and this is what this fund will help to do. The truth is, of those opposite, that when it comes to regional Australia and regional jobs, that they've buried their heads in the sand for the last decade, failed to support regional jobs. We know on this side of the House just how important regional manufacturing is for long-term jobs, and I cannot believe that a regional member of this place would be voting against this fund.
Give the call to the honourable member for Fowler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Federal grants are integral to every electorate's community groups. Recent media reports that a staffer of the former member for Fowler had been given nearly $40,000 in 3 rounds of grants for an organisation based outside the electorate. Given the staffer did not disclose a conflict of interest to the selection committee, local community groups have now raised concerns. What steps will the government take to investigate the matter to restore integrity and transparency in the grants process?
The member Barker will leave the chamber under 94A. I've made it crystal clear that is not the time to interject when ministers are on their feet before they even start talking, including the Prime Minister. He has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, the minister responsible and the government have made it very clear that we are making changes to the way that grants are given. That is why, and those objected who were opposite who were objecting just before should indicate that when we announced our budget, which cut out a whole lot of the discretionary funds, they objected at that time. That's why we're putting integrity back into the system. I was talking just yesterday about walking past North Sydney Pool, walking Toto, the dog, and there you've got a regional pool. And it was justified. It's right, you can see where it is. It's right next to the pylon and the Sydney Harbour Bridge, because maybe someone from the bush might have a swim in there once in a while. That sort of programs that they've engaged in is just extraordinary. And the former government did not have enough transparency in the way that they conducted these programs. We're making sure that we do going forward, and that's why as well you won't see from this government the sort of disgraceful rorting of bushfire funds that occurred from the National Party.
Give the call to the member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. Why is a strong manufacturing industry critical for Australia's national security? How is the Albanese Labor government supporting the defence industry, and why is this important after a decade of neglect?
Give the call to the Minister for Defence Industry and the Minister for International Development and Pacific.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Hunter, my neighbour and close friend. Mr Speaker, we face the most challenging strategic environment since World War II, and a sovereign manufacturing industry is critical to our national security. The COVID pandemic, its impact on the supply chains and the war in Ukraine has again demonstrated the need for manufacturing sovereignty. We must be a country that makes things. We need to build our key defence capabilities here, and we must be able to sustain and upgrade our platforms. And that's why the Albanese Labor government is committed to supporting Aussie manufacturing, especially in the defence industry. And that's why we'll establish a new defence industry policy informed by the Defence Strategic Review and supported by the Australian Strategic Research Agency. This defence industry policy will be complemented by the National Reconstruction Fund that will support and help grow defence manufacturing. I'm proud that defence is one of the NRF priority areas under the Minister for Industry, and that's why I can't understand why the opposition is opposed to the NRF. The Coalition's opposition to the National Reconstruction Fund demonstrates they are opposed to Aussie manufacturing. It also demonstrates that they aren't serious about supporting defence industry and, through it, our national security. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm asked about a decade of neglect. This neglect started with the very first decision the last government made about defence industry, and that was to send a $1 billion contract to Spain to build the very large Navy supply ships. Mr Speaker, they sent supply ships offshore. We built the air warfare destroyers here. They killed the car industry. We saved Bendigo through the Hawkeye mobility vehicle. They wanted to build submarines in Japan. We will build our nuclear-powered submarines in Adelaide. And, Mr Speaker, they had 12 defence and defence industry ministers. And this neglect was not just bad for defence industry, it led to 28 major defence projects running cumulatively 97 years late. And we also heard yesterday that they spent $114 million to place only 200 workers in naval shipbuilding jobs. 200 workers. That equates to over $500,000 per worker placement. The Coalition, through its opposition to the National Reconstruction Fund, is opposed to Aussie manufacturing and is weakening our defence industry, so critical to our national security. By contrast, the Albanese government is backing Aussie manufacturing, not just because it delivers high-skill, high-wage jobs, but because it's vital to our national defence. And I say to the opposition, if you really care about a sovereign defence industry, it's time to get behind the National Reconstruction Fund.
Put the call to the honourable member for Flynn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industries. Can the minister nominate a single major defence vessel that Labor commissioned between the years 2007 and 2013?
I give the order. The members on my left and the Minister for Climate Change. The House, the Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting. I want to hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I'm just trying to find any part of that question that's part of the minister's current responsibility.
The order. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, it clearly goes to precisely the matters that the minister has just been talking about.
Exactly. Well, the difficulty with that is you didn't link it to his former answer that you just said. If that had happened, the question would have been in order. Look, I'm going to allow it. It's a very, very loose question, and the minister is entitled to answer that question any way he sees fit. And I give him order. I give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you for that very generous question. It's rare to get a Dixie from the opposition.
Order, members on my left.
I got one last week, and I got another one today. So, Mr Speaker, I'm invited to contrast our performance on defence with those opposite, and I'll do that any day. Let's start with defence ministers. They had 12 defence and defence industry ministers, and what did that lead to? 28 major projects, 97 years cumulatively late. And let's go through some of my favourites. 97 years late. Let's go through some of my favourites.
The minister will resume his seat, and I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, it'll come as no surprise to you this is a point of order on relevance. The minister was asked a question which you allowed and ruled in order. The question couldn't have been clearer or tighter. It said, and I quote, Can the minister nominate a single major defence vessel that Labor commissioned between the years of 2007 and 2013? I'll give him a hint, it's less than one.
Resume your seat. The member for Fairfax. The House will come to order. The minister is being relevant and he continues with his answer. Give him the call. Order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I'm proud, of the fact that construction of the air warfare destroyers began in 2009.
Order.
I'm proud of that. I'm proud that we had to intervene in that project to save jobs in Melbourne when they gave part of that contract to a tin pot company in North Queensland that had 2 employees. 2 employees. They tasked a company to build our air warfare destroyers that had 2 staff members, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm proud to talk about defence any time. 28 major projects, 97 years late. And let's go through some of the highlights. $1.5 billion on battle lift aircraft that can't fly into battlefields. That's my favourite, Mr Deputy Speaker. Goldfish lasted longer than defence ministers under them. Goldfish lasted longer. Let's go through some of the other projects.
Order.
Helicopters where the door wasn't wide enough to fire a machine gun while soldiers came out. That's another good one, Mr Deputy Speaker. And if they want to go back further, the Sea Sprite helicopter, where those opposite spent $1.4 billion and delivered 0 helicopters. 0 helicopters, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Order.
So we're proud to have delivered the air warfare destroyer. We're proud to be making record investments in defence. We're proud to have members in this government who actually want to be in this portfolio. By contrast, they had a defence minister who said he wouldn't trust the workers of Adelaide to build a canoe. He wouldn't trust the workers of Adelaide to build a canoe. And that's why they wanted to send the submarines off to Adelaide, off to Japan. That's why we're building the submarines in Adelaide. That's why they wanted to build the submarines in Japan. We're proud of our record. They were all press release, not about delivery at all. Unlike us, who will deliver for defence and will deliver for our nation.
Order. The House will come to order. Order. There is far too much noise. Question time will be heard in silence. I give the call to the member for Tangley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why is a forward-looking defence strategy review important to ensure our nation's security is enhanced?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Tangney for his question, and this afternoon the Defence Minister and I will receive the Defence Strategic Review from, of course, the great Angus Houston, who has served Australia so well for such a long period of time. This is about preparing Australia for the challenging strategic circumstances that we face. We committed, and I announced well before the election, a Defence Force posture review, but we decided, of course, to elevate that to a full strategic review, looking at not just where our Defence Force assets were, but what our Defence Force assets are, so that we improve our capability. Because it's not, of course, just about how many dollars are spent, it's about whether those dollars are going towards creating capability improvements to defend our nation. As the Minister has just pointed out, we want to make sure that our assets are fit for purpose and that they deliver the greatest return on investment. So I thank Angus Houston and Stephen Smith for the extraordinary work that they did, and I thank all of our, not just our Defence Forces, but those in the public who made submissions, but also I do thank the international partners who met with us as well and who engaged with the review, because it's quite clear that we need to do better. When we came to office, we inherited 18 major projects running a combined $6.5 billion over budget, 28 major projects running a combined 97 years late, a future frigates program that's $15 billion over budget and delayed into the next decade. Those opposite, of course, 6 defence ministers in 8 years. And the Shadow Minister said, yes, we squandered a lot of opportunity through the leadership changes. The former minister himself, the Leader of the Opposition, said last year, I wish that we could have acquired more capability within defence earlier. Well, that's precisely what we are doing, making sure that we're actually big on delivery, not just announcements. I do note the matter of public importance today that's usually looking forward extraordinarily from the Shadow Defence Minister, the continuing consequences of the last Labor government's defence spending cuts.
So the last decade didn't happen.
It's like the last decade just didn't happen.
Try to inoculate yourself.
Order. I give the call to the honourable member for Ryan.
Minister for Resources, 68% of emissions under the safeguard mechanism come from corporations and their peak bodies that donated $896,000 to Labor's election campaign, including coal and gas companies. The proposed safeguard mechanism changes won't stop new coal and gas and will allow fossil fuel companies to continue polluting through offsets. Minister, are you willing to make the climate crisis worse by approving new coal and gas projects for your corporate mates?
I'm just going to ask the member for Ryan to rephrase the end part of her question.
Yeah.
I'll ask her to repeat the question. I'll ask her to rephrase the end part of the question.
Are you willing to make the climate crisis worse by approving new coal and gas projects?
Thank you. Give the call to the Minister for Resources in Northern Australia.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I thank. Well, I don't actually really thank the member for a question. I think it's I think it's immature and beneath your position in this place. Certainly, the tone you adopted toward the end. Of course, as the Shadow Resources Minister, when I was in opposition, and also as now the Resources Minister, I do deal with the resources industry. Of course I would, and no one would expect any less. And I'm not the only one, and neither should I be. I imagine you might meet with the resources industry, and I encourage all crossbenchers and all members of Parliament to engage with the resources industry, because they're one of the biggest employers in this country, and they are the foundation of the prosperity of this country. Since we started extraction in this country, whether it be through gold or coal or nickel, and in more modern times iron ore and other commodities, more recently new developments in critical minerals such as lithium, cobalt, developments in nickel hydroxide, which will be the underpinning of clean energy technologies that will take us to net zero emissions. All these industries, the industries that have been existent in this country since the 1880s, through extraction right through to today, will play a part in our economy for many years to come. And I think, quite frankly, everyone in this House should respect their role in our economy instead of placing slights on them like I think has just happened. The Safeguards mechanism is a part of this government's proactive response and active response to climate change in this country. All projects, and it's not just in the resources sector, there are other sectors that emit. They will be subject to it, and this government will make sure they are accountable for their emissions so they lower them, whether it be through reducing their own emissions, changing their technology, adopting new technology, or through credible offsets in this country that we can have confidence in. And I acknowledge the report of Professor Ian Chubb, the former Chief Scientist, and the work that the Minister for Climate Change and Energy is doing in regarding making sure that people, the community, the wider community, can have confidence in those offsets. Because the truth of the matter is for a number of years we will still need to use some fossil fuels to get us through this. We want to increase activity in renewables. We have a commitment to net zero emissions by 2050, but even as the International Energy Agency has acknowledged, we will need to keep using products such as gas to make sure we can process critical minerals, which will be required. You are shaking your head. I can see you shaking your head. And you seem to not believe me when I tell you that to process rare earths and critical minerals, which are the basis of all clean energy technology, you will need gas to process it. And they do, and gas companies do have to reach net zero emissions, and they will be held accountable by this government.
Order. I give the call to the honourable member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. What are the continuing consequences for the Albanese government of the previous government's incompetent spending decisions in defence? Thank you.
Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence. Order. Order. Members on my right, I would like to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, to take up the point that the Leader of the House made earlier, how are decisions of the previous government within the current minister's area of responsibility?
I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Thanks,
Order.
Speaker. To the point of order, the question begins, what are the continuing consequences for the Albanese government? That's the answer to the question that the Manager of Opposition Business just asked.
The question is in order. The first part is correct. The first part of the question is the key. I'm going to ask the Minister to make his answer relevant, and I give him the call.
Can I thank the member for her question, and thank you, Mr Speaker, and let me explain. This afternoon, the government will be receiving the Defence Strategic Review from Sir Angus Houston and Professor Stephen Smith, which is the single most important re-evaluation of Australia's strategic posture in the last 35 years against a backdrop of the most complex strategic landscape that we have faced since the end of the Second World War. The review has met with 150 different experts across academia, think tanks, defence industry and the Defence Force itself. It's received more than 360 submissions from the general public, and I have no doubt that the report that the Prime Minister and I are about to receive will be one of the most important works in Australia's defence history, and the government will take some weeks to consider this review before we announce an unclassified version of it, along with our response to it. But none of this happens in a vacuum, because the decisions that this government now has to make come on the back of a lost decade from the former coalition government, the worst national security government in our country's history. Now, time and again, we watch those opposite making decisions based on politics rather than policy, such as their decision to down-select the attack class submarine program to one tenderer before they even completed the design, just so they could do a single press conference in the lead-up to the 2016 election. That decision alone cost the Australian taxpayer billions of dollars. It was an epic failure from a government which, when it left office, had 28 different defence programs running a combined 97 years over time. But the decisions of those opposite aren't really a surprise, because they never took defence seriously. 6, really 7 different defence ministers in the course of 9 years, underpinned by another 18 defence ministers over the same period of time. It was for them a revolving door. They could not have treated defence with more contempt, because for those opposite, becoming a defence minister was simply receiving a trophy. Well, let me say this. the Defence Strategic Review ushers in a new era of defence policy in this country, one where our decisions are rooted in proper judgments, judgments which are based in the national interest, a national interest which has at its heart keeping Australians safe.
Give the call to the honourable member for McPherson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Last night it was revealed the Minister for Home Affairs received department advice highlighting the importance of temporary protection visas as deterrents that support Operation Sovereign Borders. Can the Prime Minister guarantee the dumping of TPVs won't provide an incentive for people smugglers, compromise our border protection and reopen our borders?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Put it out by text message. Thanks very much. I thank the member for her question. And she refers to last night, and I assume she's referring to Senate estimates, where Mike Pezzullo was asked the following question. Mr Pezzullo, I've just noticed the media reporting. Did the department advise against the changes to TPVs as announced today? Mike Pezzullo, no. No. In a word. Unequivocal no? No. The government, I can assure you, has listened to advice and put in place the appropriate mitigants. So the short answer about whether the government has acted contrary to advice, I would say no.
Give the call. The member for McPherson on a point of order.
No, I seek to table a document, Mr Speaker. I seek to table the relevant page of the incoming minister's brief.
We don't really need the brief.
That's not the procedure. Are you asking the Prime Minister to table, or are you tabling?
I'm seeking to table. I am seeking to table the relevant page of the incoming minister's brief, which makes it very clear what advice was given to the Minister for Home Affairs.
That wasn't relevant to the question, but I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
In terms of the procedure, leave can be sought to have tabled a document that the Minister or Prime Minister was referring to. The document that the Prime Minister referred to was a transcript from last night's proceedings. And so, if that's sought to be tabled, well, then you're outside the standing orders.
There's not the time to table that document, so resume your seat. Okay, resume your seat. Order the Minister for Home Affairs. Can I have silence so I can hear from the member for Bean?
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. How is the Albanese Labor government making health care more affordable, and why is this a priority for the government?
I give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Maybe I should swear myself in.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you very much. And I thank the member for his question, because he's such a relentless advocate for better and more affordable services in his community in the ACT. And he tells me very regularly, as do the other members of this territory, that it's never been harder to see a doctor than it is right now, and it's never been more expensive. And theirs is exactly the message that we're receiving across the country. And I think if members opposite were honest, they'd be saying their constituents were telling them that as a result of 9 years of cuts and neglect to Medicare, in particular the Medicare rebate freeze that went on for 6 long years, general practice is in the most parlous state that it has been in for 40 years. Where Australians have to pay gap fees, those gap fees have skyrocketed. More Australians than ever before are having to reach into their own pocket when they see a GP. For the first time, thank you. Just getting some fashion advice from the Leader of the Opposition to do my jacket up.
The Minister will continue.
Shows how desperate I am for fashion advice, Mr Speaker, that I reach into the bottom of the bucket and take some advice from the Leader of the Opposition. But take it I will. Take it I will, such is the generosity of spirit. Such is the generosity of spirit.
The Minister will not take free advice. He will continue with his answer.
He seeks to distract me from his poor record, Mr Speaker, The man voted by Australia's doctors as the worst health minister in the Medicare era seeks to distract me with some pretty straightforward fashion advice, but I won't be distracted, because Australians know that if they're paying a gap for the first time in the history of Medicare, they're paying a gap that is actually higher than the Medicare rebate itself to see a GP. But
Order.
Mr. Speaker, protect me.
The minister will just get on with his answer, and the Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting and giving passionate advice.
The Leader, do the button up, undo the button. To see a specialist, Mr. Speaker, to see a specialist, gap fees have skyrocketed by more than 100%. And this didn't happen out of thin air. Australians remember that after promising Australians that there would be no cuts to health, this health minister, now the Leader of the Opposition, tried to introduce a tax on every single visit to the doctor by every single Australian, pensioners, concession card holders, a tax that would have wrecked the model of Medicare that had been such a cherished part of our social fabric. So I say to the member for Bean and to all members of this House, get behind the fact that this government has made strengthening Medicare the centrepiece of our health policy, because we know how strong Medicare can be.
Give the call to the member for Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. According to the Australian Electoral Commission, just 33% of electorates outside of metropolitan Australia are held by the Labor Party. But under the government's improving mobile coverage round of the Mobile Black Spot program, 74% of locations are in Labor-held electorates. How many of these locations were chosen based on advice from the minister's department?
Order. I give the call to the Minister for Communications, the Minister for Regional Development, and the member for Macquarie will cease interjecting. Order.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Leader
Speaker,
of the Opposition.
I thank the member for his question. Improving access, especially to regional communications, is a top priority for the Albanese government. And
the member for
the
Casey will leave the
benefit
chamber
of the member, I will set out the different elements of our plan to do so. The government's election commitment of $40 million for the improving mobile coverage round of the Mobile Black Spot program is to address mobile connectivity concerns at 54 target locations around Australia. The locations were based on feedback from communities to local members, councils and mobile carriers, including reported coverage and capacity concerns, natural disaster risks, areas affected by bushfire and safety along transport routes. The important thing here, Mr. Speaker, is that these were election commitments. They were incorporated in Labor's pre-election costings. In other words, Mr. Speaker, we are delivering on our election commitments because we funded them in our budget. Now, Mr. Speaker,
this can't be on relevance. The minister is being directly relevant to the question, so it can't be a point of order on relevance. Otherwise, there will be consequences for abuse of the standing orders. I give the call to the member for Banks.
Mr. Speaker, the question very clearly asked.
What is the point of order?
It was relevant.
You may leave the chamber under 94A. No. The minister. Order. I'll hear from the manager.
Well, Mr. Speaker, with great respect, if you are to say to this side that we cannot raise a point of order on relevance, which is in the standing orders, the wording of this question is quite precise. Were the locations based on advice from the minister's department? The minister has not addressed that.
Order. Order. I'll deal with this. Yes, it is correct. Points of order can be taken on relevance. If a minister is answering directly about the question, it may not be the specific answer you want, that is not a time to simply get up and ask for a point of order on relevance. I warned the member about that. The minister is being relevant, and if that standing order is going to be abused, there will be consequences. I'll return the minister to the dispatch box to continue with her answer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, it appears the member is confusing election commitments with other funding allocations that were made under the October budget. And now, Mr Speaker, we also have public consultation on the draft grant opportunity guidelines from the 14th of November to the 28th of November 2022, conducted by the department. And the feedback provided in the consultation process was used to prepare the final grant opportunity guidelines that were published on the 2nd of February. Now, let's be very clear, Mr Speaker. We also have, under our Better Connectivity Plan, $150 million over two streams. There is $100 million for place-based connectivity solutions and $50 million for mobile black spot solutions to deliver new mobile coverage to regional, rural and remote areas. So, Mr Speaker, it is very clear that under this program, which is an election commitment for which guidelines went out to the public to determine, for which we had
and the Leader of the Nationals.
For which we had, Mr Speaker, commitments to improve connectivity in areas which had elevated bushfire and flooding risk right across Australia, Mr Speaker. We had local communities contribute to these draft guidelines, and what I would say to those opposite is I would encourage them to work with their local communities on these rounds of black spots funding, for which the guidelines have been open for public consultation, Mr Speaker. But this government is delivering on its election commitments. This government urges those to do the best by their local community and participate in that process.
Has concluded. The Assistant Treasurer is warned. Give the call to the member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. What is the Royal Commission into Robodebt revealing about the previous government's awareness of faults in their scheme? And how has the government changed its approach?
Well done.
Give the call to the Minister for Government Services.
I thank the member for Newcastle for her question. The Robodebt illegal scheme was a shocking piece of public administration, and anyone who tries to say otherwise is in denial about the consequences. But the heart of the Royal Commission, you are running a protection racket.
The Minister will resume his seat. The Manager on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, I just want to refer you to the ruling that you gave last week, where you said my approach has been to allow evidence to the Commission which has been publicly reported, but what I am less comfortable with is putting a construction on the evidence or the drawing of conclusions about the conduct of individuals who are parties to the proceedings. The Minister did this repeatedly yesterday. He's already started doing it again today, only 18 seconds in, and I would urge you to remind the Minister of the ruling that you have appropriately made.
Thank you. Before the member for Lyons, I have made 6 rulings from the 7th of November till yesterday, and I'll remind the Minister that any statements by the Minister are constrained to those matters already raised in the public domain, and I'll remind him and all members statements made in reliance on the evidence provided should not appear to reach a concluded view. So I want to hear the answer to the question, but with that in mind, and I'll give him the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. A key witness has emerged in the Royal Commission to help explain how an unlawful scheme can run for 4.5 years without it being publicly identified as unlawful by ministers. This witness I refer to is Professor Terry Carney. He's an emeritus professor. He's taught thousands of law students from Sydney University to Monash University. He's served on the AAT and its predecessor bodies for 4 decades. Now, he's identified 210 cases that were decided by the AAT over 3 years, decided on questions of lawfulness. So 210 cases. All were in favour of the applicant, not the Commonwealth. He decided 5 of them himself. So he's reviewed the whole list, found 210. He ruled on 5 of them himself. He's gone to the heart of the explanation how an unlawful scheme run by ministers How did they not know about it? How was it see no evil, hear no evil, plausibly deniable? We didn't know. What he said is with 210 cases, when governments lose cases on the law, this goes for all governments of all persuasions across our time. When you lose a case on the law, you either choose to act on the decision or you choose to appeal it. But neither happened in 210 cases. They did nothing. Now, one case maybe slipped under the radar, 2 cases, 3 cases, but it does really strain the credibility that you can have 210 cases over 3 years. Nothing to see here, Your Honour.
I'm going to ask the minister to return back to the question and not to give a concluded view while the Royal Commission is underway and give him the call.
It is a matter of fact that Professor Carney looked at 210 cases and the then government didn't do anything. Like literally did nothing. They didn't question the law that they were operating under.
The manager will resume his seat. The minister has one more chance. I want him to answer the question, which was about the Minister for Skills is on a warning. The question was about the Royal Commission revealing faults in the robo scheme and what has the government changed in that approach.
Yeah.
I'm reminding him for the final time not to give a concluded view, otherwise I will sit him down and I return him back to the question.
Well, I won't give a concluded view, certainly not. Just stating the facts. 210 cases, nothing happened. The problem is that we see this pattern in the evidence emerging. Oh, sorry, one thing happened. Professor Carney didn't get renewed in his position in 2017. So we've got a missing $1 million report, shelved. We've got the Masterton legal opinion, never revealed. On 140 occasions, coalition minister said, I don't recall. The evidence, you don't have to draw a concluded view yet, but we know where it's going.
Give the call to member for Groom.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer. Last week, The Australian reported on the millions of dollars flowing from industry super funds to unions, including over $3.5 million from super funds to the CFMEU, a union which donated $4.3 million to the Labor Party last year. Why did the Assistant Treasurer try to change the rules so such donations would no longer have to be publicly reported?
Give a call to the Assistant Treasurer.
I thank the member for his question. It is true, Deputy Speaker, that Labor stands behind superannuation. 30 years of history. It is making our economy stronger. It is making Australians wealthier in retirement. The average Australian woman today is retiring with $120,000 in superannuation. The average Australian male, $180,000 in superannuation. And in this July, superannuation contributions will go up by 0.5%. Every single one of those dollars and every single percent has been opposed by those opposite. We stand for superannuation. We believe that it should be performing well, and we believe that every single dollar that is contributed to a superannuation fund should be used for the purpose of advancing members' retirement income. Should be used for the purpose of advancing members' retirement income. Which is why, upon coming into government, we reviewed all of the transparency arrangements that we're applying to superannuation funds and the reporting arrangements. And when we did that review, we discovered there were big gaps. Yes, it is true that the members opposite and the previous government introduced new reporting arrangements. They were politically driven and ensured that members received misleading and ambiguous information. So we have reviewed these arrangements and put in place new reporting and new transparency arrangements. Number one, as a result of our legislation, as a result of the legislation introduced by myself,
the Assistant Treasurer will resume his seat.
Are you allowed to eat in the chamber, are you?
Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. Members on my right will cease interjecting. I'd like to hear the member for Groom.
Speaker, this is a cover-up, not an answer.
The question's very clear. Why did you
resume your
change
seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. No, just the minister will pause. The House will come to order. The House will come to order. I thought I'd made this crystal clear about the abuse of standing orders. You do not rise to your feet and start yelling anything you want. Order. The Minister for Education. That is an abuse of the standing orders. We've been down this road before. That is not acceptable behaviour. You'll leave the chamber under 94A. Order. The House will come to order. The Assistant Treasurer will continue with his answer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now, as a result of the new reforms that our government has put in place in transparency in superannuation, there will be a new requirement for superannuation funds to publish an annual report and have it filed with ASIC. It didn't occur under this mob over here. They said they stood for transparency. No requirement to file and produce an annual report. New legislative requirement. In addition to that, there will be an annual transparency report, including on the matters that have been raised by the member who's been ejected from the chamber, about donations, about payments to related parties, a single point of truth, so that not only is it available to fund members, it is available to the journalists, it is available to analysts and available to members of parliament to not only understand and look at the payments that have been made and the performance of every single fund that you're a member of, but every other fund in the registered superannuation system as well. And in addition to that, they will receive a notice of annual meeting. Now, under the proposition that the members opposite putting forward, you will not get one extra skerrick of transparency, not one extra skerrick of transparency, but loads of confusion.
Concluded. I give the call to the member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. How has the Albanese Labor government improved the administration and processing of visa and citizenship applications?
Give the call to the Minister for Citizenship, Immigration and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Bennelong for his question. I know that in representing his diverse community so well, these are issues of great importance to him. He's already been a terrific advocate on all of these questions. Now, he knows, and members on this side know, that when we came into government there were almost 1 million visas waiting to be processed, an enormous backlog for a country of our size, with huge consequences for our society and indeed for our economy. Today I'm pleased to let members know the number is now below 600,000. And working with my friend, the Minister for Home Affairs, we have sought to deliver the certainty that is so important for families, for businesses and, importantly, for prospective migrants, because we recognise that we are in a global fight for talents. And after the investment in the visa system that was secured through the Jobs and Skills Summit, at which some members were not represented, there are now an additional 485 staff supporting our visa system. These people, these hard-working people, have helped process now more than 4.7 million visa applications. This is only possible because of the investments the Albanese government has been making and, of course, due to the hard work of these workers. And their work has seen a real difference. Waiting times for visa categories like international students and skilled workers have now been slashed. I'm pleased to advise that international students looking to come and study at universities here now wait an average of 12 days. 12 days instead of months and months when we were sworn in as ministers. Applications for temporary skill shortages are now turned around in weeks instead of months under those opposite. And in critical areas of need, which the member for Chifley has been talking about so effectively so often, like IT and cyber security, the time to process a temporary skilled visa is down by 60%. And this government is filling skills shortages right across this country, in the cities and the regions, by delivering a regional visa program that is, get this, 3 times larger than that delivered by those opposite. 3 times larger. Now, we've also unlike those opposite, recognised the importance of citizenship. We are a nation built on citizenship. It is a common bond that unites all Australians, and too many Australians have waited too long under those opposite because of the previous government's long-term neglect of the immigration function of national government. On their watch, citizenship processing times tripled. But I'm pleased to announce that now, for the first time in over 5 years, there are less than 100,000 citizenship applications waiting to be processed. We are taking responsibility and getting on with the job, not talking about problems but solving them.
I'll call the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On that very positive note from the Immigration Minister, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Just